according to all reports and my own impressions, yesterday was quite a spectacular day. We heard some of the most important and interesting presentations, I think, that we've heard in the 10 years of this summit. So the good news is that we're not done yet, and I think we've got a very, very strong lineup today as well. Boo asked me to mention the fact that our Louisiana Speaks champions from 10 years ago, some of them will actually be presenting today. Sean Riley, Walter Leger, and Andy Copland. And I know we probably have some of the other champions from 10 years ago in the room. And if you are one of those, as I am, would you mind standing so we can recognize you? Well, thank you, Jim. So it's my pleasure this morning to introduce the chair of the Smart Growth Summit Planning Committee, the committee that assists the staff in putting together this remarkable conference. He is James Slayton. He's a lawyer with the Stone Pigman Law Firm in New Orleans and in Baton Rouge. James is in the practice of commercial real estate matters with particular emphasis on land use and zoning, as well as other aspects of general business and corporate law. He's been recognized in publications such as the Best Lawyers in America for his work in the field of real estate law. James also serves as vice chair of the Land Use and Environmental Group of the American Bar Association's Real Property, Trust, and Estate Law section. James is a graduate of the LSU Law School, where he was a member of the Order of the Coif and the Louisiana Law Review. And it's my pleasure to welcome James, who will introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Cordell. I appreciate the introduction there. And I just do want to clarify one thing. When he says I'm chair of the Planning Committee, the Planning Committee assists the staff in putting all this on. By assist the staff, he means listens to all the staff's great ideas, watch all their hard work, and say, yeah, let's do that. So the very little assisting. The staff does a tremendous job every year. So thanks to all of them for their very hard work. But yes, my name is James Slayton, and on behalf of Stone Pigman, I'd like to welcome you to year 10 of the Smart Growth Summit. We're proud to be a member of CPEX and a sponsor of the Smart Growth Summit. Over the past 10 years, CPEX has accomplished many remarkable things, from leading the development of Plan Baton Rouge that helped catalyze the development of downtown, to providing community planning assistance to 45 cities, towns, and parishes in the state, and to securing millions of dollars of community planning funding and leveraging that into millions more to benefit area communities most in need. Of its many accomplishments, though, perhaps none is more significant than what happens here each year at the Smart Growth Summit. Once a year, we gather together to talk about what works and what doesn't work in planning, to learn from national experts, to learn from our peers, to get inspired to try new things, to be emboldened to part with old ways. We come here to imagine how things could be better, and that's important, because if we stop imagining how things could be better, then we'll stop working to make them better. And yes, it can be a bit wonky with talks of codes, form-based codes, green building, walkability, mixed uses, high density, NIMBYs, PUDs, TIFs, PPPs, TODs, TNDs, MSG, and so on. There's a lot of jargon here, we all know that, but that's not why you're here. That's not what excites you. Well, it probably does excite a couple of you. You know who you are. You're a little weird, but you found your people, so that's good. But it's still not the jargon that gets you coming back each year. It's still not the jargon that gets you excited about being here. It's not abstract conceptualizing either. What makes this summit exciting and important is that we are looking to a brighter future and figuring out how to order the present to get there. We're planning for a better life. We're figuring out how to make healthier, happier places to live with healthier, happier people living in them. And that, to paraphrase the great Linus Van Pelt, is what Smart Growth Summit is all about, Charlie Brown. So thank you for coming this morning. But you also didn't come to hear a moderator speak. You came to hear our great speaker this morning, and let me tell you a little bit about him before he comes up. Mr. Christopher Leinberger is a land use strategist, teacher, developer, researcher, and author. He has an impressive list of accomplishments. Just to name a few, he is president of Locus, a project of Smart Growth America comprised of responsible real estate developers and investors that is also part of the National Coalition Transportation for America. He is the Charles Bendit Distinguished Scholar and Research Professor at George Washington University School of Business, where he is also the chair of the Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis. He is a non-resident senior fellow at Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. He is the founding partner of Arcadia Land Company, a new urbanism and transit-oriented development firm. His most recent book is The Option of Urbanism, Investing in a New American Dream. He is the author of Strategic Planning for Real Estate Companies and has contributed chapters to 12 other books. He's an op-ed contributor to the New York Times, writes regularly for the Atlantic Monthly and numerous other magazines. He's been profiled by CNN, National Public Radio, Atlantic Cities Channel, Washington Post, and numerous other publications. He was voted one of the top 100 urban thinkers in a 2009 poll conducted by Planetizen, which is an international urban planning website. And he was the 2010 William H. White Urbanism Award winner by Partners for Livable Communities. And I could spend many, probably the rest of the session, continuing to list his great accomplishments. And with a resume like that, he could no doubt speak about any number of fascinating topics. But he's here today to talk about walkable urban development and how that fits with the goals of sustainable development and economic growth. So without further ado, Chris Leinberger.
It is always great to be back in Louisiana. I get down here a lot. My wife and I were down here a few months ago and had a blast. And I also know you very well because I'm on Pres Kabikoff's board of HRI down in New Orleans. We just had a board meeting yesterday. Lots going on down here, but also there's a lot of things that are not happening down here that should be happening. And you're lagging, you're not on the cutting edge, particularly here in Baton Rouge, and you've a lot of good ideas, a lot more that needs to be implemented, however. You're being lapped, basically, by a lot of folks that you shouldn't have been lapped by. So what I want to talk about is why the market wants this stuff, why the market wants smart growth, high-density, walkable urban development, and something that many people, particularly in this metro area, just don't understand. They just figure there's only one option that people want. That's it, one option, single-family homes and drive to a strip mall. That's just not the case. And so there's only two ways to build the built environment. That's it. There's drivable suburban, which you all know and love. You have lots of it. And it's something the market discovered back in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, and we fell in love with it. And so we in real estate, as a real estate developer, we gave the market what it wanted, and we just keep on doing the same thing over and over again, in spite of the fact that the market's now changed. So the second way of building the built environment is walkable urban, high density, mixed use, and everything's within walking distance. You can get there by car, by truck, by bus, by rail transit, by biking, by walking. But once you're there, it's walkable. Everything is within walking distance. That means these places are actually very, very tiny, very small. And our research has really demonstrated that. So those are your two options. That's it. The other thing to recognize, and I know this is a constant debate throughout the country, but particularly here, is that of the 15 infrastructure categories, we know who's first among equals, and it's transportation. That's why you have a Secretary of Transportation in the state government. You don't have a Secretary of Sewers. that transportation drives development. For the last 6,000 years we've been building cities. It's the transportation system that dictates the form of development. So if you only build, like this slide shows, one form of transportation, i.e. freeways and highways, you get what the transportation system dictates, which is drivable suburban. However, if you put in a portfolio of different transportation systems, obviously highways and freeways, but also rail transit and bike lanes and making it more pedestrian friendly, you can build the other alternative, walkable urban. But keep in mind that it's, again, transportation drives development. People sometimes say, well, we can't build rail transit because we don't have the density. Well, you've got your logic back, completely backwards. That would be somewhat akin to saying that back in the 50s that a farmer says, gee, I'd like to build a suburban subdivision. Can you build a road here so my buyers can actually get into the city and get to work? And if the transportation folks came back and said, well, no. You build the subdivision first, and then we'll build the road. Obviously, it's transportation first, development follows. So the corollary to transportation drives development is that you don't build the transportation system with the goal of moving people. That's not the goal. Unfortunately, your DOT has that firmly in their mind as to that's the goal of why you build all these systems. No, you build a transportation system with the goal of economic development. The means is moving people. It's not a whole lot of fun to build things that people just basically, drive or sit and move all around, not doing anything productive. That's not the goal. The goal is economic development, and you're not participating in a very important part of this economy because you've not built the kind of places and the transportation systems that the market's demanding, i.e. what the knowledge economy is demanding, and the major input into the knowledge economy happens to be the creative class. And I'll come back to that. So back in the early part of the last century, all we pretty much built was walkable urban places. Some of your neighborhoods here were built as walkable urban, and they're now probably the most valuable real estate in the region because of its high-density walkable urbanism. Certainly that's the case down in New Orleans. And after the Second World War, we pushed that pendulum all the way over to the other side, and all we built in real estate was drivable suburban. Again, the market wanted it, we provided it. And you know how that laid out. We first pushed out single-family housing out onto the fringe, and we discovered from the Germans how to build freeways. Then we invented business parks and regional malls. Obviously, over the years, we've gotten a whole lot better at building freeways. This, of course, is from the center of freeway building in this country, Texas. And we've just continued to push further and further out. As a result, for every 1% population growth, we've seen land use consumption be 6 to 8%. Otherwise, of course, known as sprawl. This is about a 15-year-old cartoon from the Wall Street Journal with their view of sprawl. And of course, 15 years ago, sprawl going for a mere 10, 30, 40 miles. Today it's 40, 50, 60 miles. Now, just to show that this is a jargon-free zone, this morning's not all focused on just all the TOD and MFG kind of stuff, that the movie that nailed urbanism, popular movie that nailed urbanism better than any movie ever made, is Back to the Future. And why this is important is that it's the only popular movie to show the two ways of building the built environment in 3 different time zones, 3 different time frames. And they nailed almost everything. They got it right. So in this clip, I want to show you downtown Hill Valley in 1955, a walkable urban place, probably built, now this is a fictional place, so probably built in the late 19th, early 20th century. Now, by the way, as a real estate developer, I have to let you in on a little trick that we have, which is you name your development after what you destroy to build it. So Hill Valley, you push the hill into the valley, and you call the town Hill Valley. So here's 19 55, downtown Hill Valley. So here's the downtown square, civic space, retail on the ground floor, office, apartments up above. Somewhat dense place, but you can get there by car, by bus, by bicycle, by skateboard, if you're Michael J. Fox, or of course, once you're there, it's all walkable. That was this idyllic place that anybody out there who has gray hair remembers because that's how you grew up. Now, fast forward to 1985 when the movie came out, and you see a fundamentally different downtown Hill Valley. And by the way, that fundamental difference you could also see in this billboard. This billboard is where Michael J. Fox parked his DeLorean behind it to hide it. The billboard advertises the subdivision that he was born in 10 years after. So hence the seeds of the destruction of that downtown and a new way of building taking over. So here's downtown Hill Valley, 1985. Fundamentally different place, X-rated movie theaters, homeless on the street. Behind that homeless bench is a surface parking lot. That was the plaza, paved over. So where does he go? He goes out to the new center of gravity in that city, in that metro area. Naturally, he goes out to the regional mall. And surrounded by business parks, that's where the energy has been shifted. And as you can see, that lone pine tree had to go for that regional mall. Now keep in mind that regional mall was probably about 100 acres in size. 20% of the land was covered in, as far as all those retail stores, 80% was surface parking lots, and on either side of it, strip malls and business parks that you would need a car to get, even if you were going next door, you would need a car to get there. So, but what happened then? Back in the mid-90s, we began, I used to own the country's largest real estate consulting firm, doing a lot of market research for real estate developers. And back in the mid-90s, we began to see some weird stuff happening. That all of a sudden, the market was demanding something they had not demanded for 50 years. High-density, walkable urban places, as our downtowns started turning around, as our suburban town centers started to become much more vital places. And Back to the Future nailed that as well. So here is Back to the Future 2. Now, as you know, there are 3 movies. Back to the Future 1, which those clips that I just showed you came from. Back to the Future 2, which I'm going to show you a clip from now. Back to the Future 3 was worthless, so don't bother looking that up. And here is the near distant future coming back to downtown Hill Valley, and it's an entirely different place. The plaza's now been completely redeveloped, reanimated. It's now the center of town again. All the buildings have been either redeveloped or torn down and turned into much higher density. Everybody's, people on the street, no longer a homeless hangout. They got everything right except one thing. They always promise us flying cars. We never get flying cars. Now, when is this near distant future? 2 weeks ago, October 21st, 2015. And that's exactly what's happened throughout this country. We've seen places that were derelict 20 years ago, that were slums 20 years ago, now have the highest sales price per square foot, have the highest rents per square foot in the region. The lines have crossed. Unfortunately, not in Baton Rouge. Now, who is, in fact, to blame for this? It's the damn kids. It's the millennials driving this. And you can see this in the TV shows that we gray hairs grew up with. Leave It to Beaver, Dick Van Dyke, The Brady Bunch, all set in the suburbs. Hollywood does more consumer research than any industry. It's my contention that that Hollywood TV shows that are popular are aspirational. They show where we want to live. When Lucy left Manhattan to go to Connecticut the third week of January of 1957, almost all of our parents and grandparents lived in the city. Very few lived in the suburbs. It was aspirational. So what did the kids grow up on? My kids? It was Seinfeld and Friends and Two Broke Girls, all set in walkable, urban, vital, safe places. Now, the baby boomers are of course still part of it. They downsize, they're retiring, they're becoming empty nesters. So when you look at it from a demographic point of view, that when I was growing up, 50% of households had children in the household. 50% were singles and couples. Today, it's 75% of households are singles and couples. Now, the market for walkable urbanism tends to be targeted at singles and couples. But I live near Georgetown up in DC, and on Saturday night, my wife and I went over to Georgetown, where there's a baby boom going on, and there are kids everywhere. You know this in Georgetown. They have very narrow sidewalks, but all these millennials, for some reason, they love these Cadillac strollers. Whether they have one kid or two kids, they have these huge strollers, take up the entire sidewalk. But the same thing's happening in the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side of New York, obviously Brooklyn. It's happening in Midtown up in Atlanta, where families are moving in and staying in walkable urban places. Now, what about the future? That the projections call for the marginal growth in households, the new growth in households. 86% of the new growth in households is going to be singles and couples. The market's telling us something. Build more walkable urban place. Now, the other thing is, of course, sheer boredom. That up until 5 years ago, if you were moving to Baton Rouge and you had a choice in where you lived, you could live in a single-family house or a single-family house. You had no choice. This is a capitalist society. We want choices. As I mentioned earlier, the knowledge economy is driving this economy, and as I'm going to show you in just 1 second, if you don't provide what the knowledge economy wants, which is walkable urban product, the creative class, which drives it, ain't coming. And then finally, it's just the expense of maintaining a fleet of cars to participate in society. We have a domestic policy that says that you must, it's mandated from the top down, you must drive. And the average household that lives in a drivable suburban location is spending 25% of their household income, number 2 category of spending, on maintaining a fleet of cars. You drop 1 car out of your household, according to the AAA, it'll save you $9,200 per year. That's $9,200 per year after tax. You convert that into a mortgage, you increase your mortgage capacity by $150,000. So would you rather invest in a depreciable asset or a generally appreciable asset? Your choice. Now, I want to show you some recent research just did up in Metro Boston. Metro Boston is one of the top 3 most walkable places in the country. A bit of a model here for you. We looked at 100% of all the land in Metro Boston, 3,100 square miles. Nobody's ever done this before, and we inventoried 100% of the real estate, 5.5 billion square feet. So I mentioned to you that we have 2 ways of looking at the form of land use, walkable urban, drivable suburban. We also have 2 economic ways of using land. Local serving, which are bedroom communities, which is where the bulk of you live, and regionally significant. These are places like where we're sitting right now. Regionally significant places are places that we create the wealth of our society. And so when you take the 3,100 square miles and drop it into those into that 4-cell matrix, and then you begin to see how different kinds of places and different economic character perform. Up in Boston, again, one of the top 3 most walkable urban metros in the country, their walkable urban land totals 5.6% of the land mass. Over 40% of the people live there. Over 40% of the jobs are there. This is how it lays out. The brightly colored places are the 57 walkable urban places that play a regional role in the economy. They are the densest areas in the entire region. It's important to note that it's not just the redevelopment of our center cities, it's also the urbanization of our suburbs. A lot of the places in Boston that are the walkable urban places are, the Harvard Squares and the Kendall Squares and the Union Square in Somerville that are suburban places that are becoming walkable urban again. By the way, 74% of those 57 places are rail transit served. That's not a coincidence. This is how the land use breaks out, by the way. This has never been understood as to what percentage of the real estate market, that 5.5 billion square feet, is in which product category. So 63% is for sale residential of the total square footage. By the way, though, about 10 percentage points of that 63% is actually rented single-family homes. And 5% is rental apartment, 4% retail, 6% office. The big issue, though, is how do they perform economically? And when you take a look at this really walkable urban place, Boston, you see that the walkable urban products get a huge price premium. We looked at the values of all these different product types, and for sale residential, walkable urban for sale residential gets 90% higher on a sales per square foot basis than a drivable suburban home. Rental apartments are 54% more valuable on a price per square foot basis. Hotels are 120% more valuable on a price per square foot basis. Offices are 134% more valuable. What we're seeing in Boston and in other towns that are out there on the edge is that everybody's leaving those business parks and moving into walkable urban places. Why? Because that's what I mentioned earlier. The knowledge economy wants it. And if you don't give it to them, the knowledge economy is not going. So back 25 years ago, the knowledge economy in Boston was out on the Beltway, what they call 128. So the 128 Beltway was where all the high-tech firms were. Today, all the high-tech firms are downtown or in Cambridge. That the Secretary of Commerce mentioned to me the other day up in Boston that the high-tech firms that are still stuck out on 128 have to pay a $25,000 per year bonus to software engineers to get them to work there, because they're driving all the way out from Boston out to 128 to these sterile business parks. That $25,000 per person bonus comes out of the value of the real estate. As far as how it impacts government, up in Boston we found that walkable urban places generate 12 times the tax revenues for local government per acre that a regional mall or business park generates. And local serving neighborhoods generate 6 times the tax revenue. We didn't know this before. Now, you heard from Peter Calthorpe yesterday. They've figured that out in California as well. Up in Boston, they didn't know this. So why would you ever invest your limited capital dollars as a local official in roads and sewers that are extended out miles and miles, when if you put them into walkable urban development, you're going to get 6 to 12 times the revenue for basically the same cost per mile to put in those sewers and roads and other forms of transportation. Now, but here's the big thing, goes back to the economic development. We looked at the largest 30 metros in the country and categorized them based upon which were the most walkable urban, which were the least. The most walkable urban are in the upper right-hand corner, the little green dots. That's the Bostons and the Seattles of this world, of this country. And I compared them to the least walkable, Tampa, Phoenix, places like Orlando, quite honestly, places like here. Again, we didn't rank you because you are not in the largest 30, but you're one of the least walkable urban places. And we looked at the workforce, the people who are over age 25 with a college degree. That's one of the most common ways of understanding the education of the workforce. And the walkable urban towns had 39% of their workforce have their college degrees versus 29% for the least walkable. Now, what does that mean? I mean, why is that important? It dictates how wealthy you are. That the 6 most walkable metros have a gross domestic product per capita of $60,000 per year. The least walkable, they have a GDP per capita of 44,000. That's a 38% gap. That's the same gap as between Germany and Greece. And if you lived in Europe, where would you rather be? Obviously, all the migrants are rushing to Germany, trying to get through Greece, because Greece is poor, Germany's on the rise. It's the same thing with walkable urban metros. The walkable urban ones are the ones that are making the money and are building the wealth. So here, it's important to keep in mind that it's not just downtown. A lot of the discussion here has been about redevelopment of downtown. Well, downtown's certainly one of them. Those are one of the places that we see walkable urban development take place. But there's another 5, actually 6 categories. One is downtown adjacent, places that are surrounding downtown and that have a different character, lower density, and they too are redeveloping. Downtown Dallas is surrounded by Uptown and Victory and Deep Ellum and Cedars, all surrounding downtown Dallas, all exploding with growth. Then we also see urban commercial places. These are places within the center city that went down economically back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and now they're coming back as great urban entertainment districts, as regional serving retail. We also see anchored by urban universities, and you obviously have a fabulous urban university with LSU that I hear you have a pretty good football team too. By the way, you heard that I teach at George Washington. I'm going to guarantee you that LSU will never beat GW in football. Never. We don't have a football team. So urban universities have been a great anchor for great walkable urban places. Then you move out to the suburbs. Suburban town centers, these are 18th, 19th century towns that were absorbed by the sprawl. They went downhill economically in the late 20th century. They're now all coming back because they have a great grid of streets laid out before the car showed up and a lot of historic buildings that can be taken advantage of. But here's the biggie that we're going to see is the redevelopment of regional malls and business parks. We're seeing this throughout the country. A lot of, there's not been a new regional mall built in 10 years in this country. There won't be another regional mall built. What's being built is, or what you're seeing is regional malls being torn down and turned into high-density, mixed-use, walkable urban places. And then finally, you'll see a few greenfield sites. Not going to see too many of these. The Chinese are doing a lot of this. Peter Calthorpe's doing a lot of work in China. But we have so much land that we can urbanize that we've already enveloped in our sprawl. We don't need that many more greenfield sites. Now, there's no such thing as a free lunch. That the big issue is that, again, up in Boston, 5.6% of the land's walkable urban. That's it. We think 80% of all future development is going to go to less than 10% of the land, and we know where that 10% is. The problem is that less than 10% of the land, or in Boston, 5.6% of the land prices skyrocket. And as a result, high economic performance, low affordable housing. We've got an affordable housing crisis in this country, especially walkable urban places. And I'll be talking about this over lunch. So I won't go into the details of why we've got this crisis. But basically, we need a conscious affordable housing strategy in these walkable urban places. We can't rely upon the current affordable housing strategy that I'm sure you all know what it is. It's drive until you qualify. Just keep on driving another 10, 20 miles and you'll find something you can afford. Of course, you've got to put more money into your fleet of cars and you'll never see your kids. So it's important to note that what used to be a niche market, walkable urban places, it now is the market. And Baton Rouge, you're being lapped. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Do you have a second for a couple of questions?
Sure.
You talked about strip mall redevelopment and suburban town center redevelopment, but what do we do in a place like this, where we've just got, mile after mile of cul-de-sac suburban development, not around any old town center? What do we do, and what drives that?
90% of what you have in place is not going to change. So, and again, drivable suburban is perfectly great for a lot of people. A lot of people like it. It's just that we built too much of it. We in real estate are known for that no matter how good the market is, we'll overbuild it. Well, we have overbuilt drivable suburban phenomenally. All my research looking into the crash back in 2007, 2008, it was driven by the overbuilding of the drivable suburban fringe. We built too much stuff in the wrong location. That's what cratered the mortgage market, which brought down the entire economy across the globe. When you look at housing price declines, that if a metropolitan area went down by X% as far as housing prices back in the 2007 through 2010 period, the walkable urban product just went flat. The drivable suburban fringe product went down 2X%, twice as much. Virtually all of the loss in equity in household value was in the drivable suburban fringe. That's what cratered the economy. And it's just because we built too much of one type of product. And the reason for that is that we only make that legal to build. It's illegal. I'm a developer. I've done 14 different projects, all walkable urban. When I proposed each of those projects, it was illegal to build them. And it took me millions of dollars and years of brain damage to change the local laws to allow the walkable urban product to be built. And so that's what happened back 7, 8 years ago. So that drivable suburban stuff is just going to stay there. And the challenge, and this is somewhat grim, I wrote a cover piece for The Atlantic, now it's 6 years ago. It was entitled The Next Slum. And my definition of a slum is when the market price of a house is less than the replacement cost of building the house. So the market price may be low compared to replacement, and you think, I got a great deal. But then when you have to repair the roof, when you have to put on a new roof, you say, well, gee, every dollar I put in this house, I'm not going to get out. So you patch the roof. You need a new kitchen. You don't replace it because you know that $40,000 you're going to put into the kitchen, you'll never get back out. So that's the definition of a slum, and we're seeing these fringe drivable suburban places where the market price is lower than replacement value, and it's going to be a big challenge for our society. But as I say, the action is in that 5, 6, 7% of the land that's walkable urban. So that's where your focus should be, as far as making those places mixed income, mixed use. And oh, by the way, you have a special problem that I'm sure that you've noticed. The water level's rising as the ground falls. And most projections call for southern Louisiana to, basically get out your water wings. You're going to have to tread water a lot. You're not going to be able to protect your entire metropolitan region. It's too big to protect it, whatever means by which you're going to protect it, natural or whether you're using artificial dikes. And you're only going to be able to protect a small percentage of your land over the next 20, 30 years. Boston has the same problem. New York has the same problem. So you're only going to be able to afford to protect the walkable urban places. So it's really important to identify where they're going to be and make sure that you put in the infrastructure needed so that you can protect them. It's a challenge you have and a lot of other towns have. And you know, you can't ignore Mother Market, you can't ignore Mother Nature.
All right, well, Chris, thank you very much for coming and being with us today. It's all very fascinating, if not a little depressing with that last note, but do appreciate the thoughts, and it is something we need to keep at the forefront. One other, yeah, please. Sure, actually, I am told we do have time for some questions from the audience, so if you haven't run off, do we have any? Phil?
I'm wondering, Chris, if you have any thoughts on, it seems somewhat unfair to compare Baton Rouge to Boston. Are there southern peer cities that Baton Rouge should be looking to similar size, had similar problems in the past and dealt with them?
Chattanooga. Chattanooga was a Rust Belt town, heavy industry. It all collapsed back in the 80s. And their downtown adjacent places, regional malls that were close in were all collapsing. And the civic leadership got together in a similar fashion to what you're doing here and says, we can't let this happen. Now, it's an interesting thing. One thing that they have going for them, most towns grow in one direction where all the rich white folk go. Race has always been a major factor in how we built our metropolitan regions. It's referred to as the favored quarter. And, you know, a topography plays a big role in that, obviously. In Chattanooga, however, the downtown is surrounded by 3 mountains. And the rich white folk were living on top of those 3 mountains, looking at downtown as it was collapsing. And what they did is that they came together as a community. They embraced the river. They embraced downtown. And downtown adjacent places have just fundamentally turned around. That's where the action is. And then their first regional mall has also been turned around into a high-density, mixed-use, walkable urban place. So it's a metro area of about 600,000. They just got the Volkswagen plant. Now, obviously, that's a good news, bad news these days. But they got it 3 years ago. And I talked to the Volkswagen executives as to their reasoning. And the number one reason is Chattanooga felt like a German city. It had a downtown, it had vibrancy. That's what they were used to. They aren't used to hollowed out downtowns in Germany. And that was the number one reason, because they needed to get their executives to say yes to moving to this place. So Chattanooga is a very good example of a mid-size southern town.
What trends are you seeing in, I guess, housing or building, innovative building options for seniors, aging baby boomers?
Right. You know, we baby boomers, it's always about us, isn't it? Come on, bring it on. Just let's talk more about us. We are the most selfish generation, by the way. I mean, I am not proud of my generation. The best place to grow older is a walkable urban place. And one of my students, his thesis, and he's now a developer of senior housing, and his thesis was comparing the cost of service of drivable suburban senior housing versus walkable urban senior housing, and the cost of service to maintain somebody, and this is why you get the cheapest help, and people just look at retirement housing and just say, never me, is because they have forced retirement housing to provide all the services at a price, at a market price, that you get for free in a walkable urban place. So rather than having gymnasiums and exercise classes, rather than, in comparison to walking around your neighborhood down to get a cup of coffee and seeing your friends. You do that at great cost in a retirement housing setting if it's isolated. All the social activities that have to be paid for, and therefore it's part of the monthly fee of being in that facility, you have for free by walking down to the library or walking to the various clubs and various other social activities that are just a natural part of a walkable urban place. So we have a lot to learn, and the senior housing industry has particularly a lot to learn. They don't really get it yet. One of the best things, and I'm going to be talking about place management at lunch, and one of the key issues that make walkable urban places work is place management. And I'll go into what that means in just, in a few hours, but for seniors, there's a fabulous volunteer-based organization called the Village Movement. This is not the Village People. This is the Village Movement. It came out of Back Bay in Boston, sorry to say, but it's now throughout the country, where, and it's in my neighborhood in DuPont Circle in DC, where there's one staff person hired, and then all the rest is volunteers to provide services like taking people to the grocery store, to the doctors, providing social activities, and it's almost entirely volunteer of all these people that are young and old that are providing volunteer services. It's just a matter of organizing it, and that'll help people be able to age in place if they're in a walkable urban place. But they only work in walkable urban places because you have to have all this stuff within walking distance.
All right. Do we have time for one more, Boo? Okay. Anyone else?
One more demographic question. How are divorced homes kind of factored into your houses with children? Is it counted as one with a major, caretaker, or are we actually inflating those numbers with two homes that count as having children when it's really half the time? And are there any other insights about divorced homes?
It's the latter. Roughly 50% of marriages end up in a divorce, so that becomes two households. And so when you look at demographics, you tend to look at the house, and particularly if you are interested in the built environment, in real estate and the built environment, you look at the households. So yes, unfortunately, because of the high divorce rate, that we are creating more households. That's why the number, the average person in a household continues to fall. It is also a reflection, though, of course, of the fact that, and this is, the biggest demographic change taking place on the planet is that we have just hit, believe it or not, peak population, not in numbers, but in the rate of growth. That over the last 15 years, young people under the age of 15 worldwide have now peaked. And it's going to start going down. Now that ripple is going to continue to have the population grow until we hit to 10 billion on the planet. But we have a whole new reality that's going to hit us in this world, and Europe is seeing this, and that's why the immigration crisis could be a big positive for Germany, because they don't have young people. They've only had 0, 1 at most two children under the replacement rate. So they've been losing population. That's a good thing. That's a good thing for the planet. And China is just about to go down that same path. So we're going to deal with a future that will see less and less people on the planet. And something that most Americans and most Europeans don't understand, that it's not just Americans and Europeans that are having fewer babies. The entire world, the average birth rate of a woman is 2.5. It used to be 5 50 years ago. 5 births per woman on average 50 years ago. Now it's 2.5. Replacement's 2.1. So, Africa's getting the message. Asia's getting the message a lot faster than we think. So we're going to be, from a demographic point of view, the big issue is that we're going to be, retreating in our population growth. And again, that's a good thing because we don't need 10, 12 billion people on the planet.
Well, thank you
Good.
again, Chris. Appreciate it
so
very much. By the way, another interesting bit about Back to the Future, if you notice the name of the mall at the beginning of the movie before Michael J. Fox goes back in time, it's Twin Pines Mall. He goes back in time, hits one of the pines with the DeLorean, and then when he goes back to the future, it's Lone Pine Mall. So kind of an interesting thing to pay attention to. Great 80s movie. Another great 80s movie, by the way, commenting on suburban sprawl, Poltergeist. Think about it. Thank you all for being here this morning. Before you go, I'd like to leave you with one last thought. I've explained why I and my firm believe so strongly in the CPEC's mission. I hope that you will all consider joining us in CPEC's membership to support the wonderful work this group is doing here and all across the state, trying to build those healthier, happier places to live that we talked about. So thank you all for coming this morning. Enjoy the rest of the conference.